Today's speaker is a food futurist, and anybody who knows a little bit about myself knows that I am uber excited to hear about this because this is right up my street. All the way from Brisbane, Australia, Tony Hunter is a food futurist with a background as a food scientist and many decades. The bio does say the number of decades, but I'll spare his blushes and not name them. He has many years experience in the food industry and has witnessed and participated in huge transformations. He's developed a limitless appetite for new food technologies, becoming one of the world's thought leaders on the future of food. Tony will be looking at 5 steps for planning in a pandemic, so very apt and timely. We're in a period of extreme change where nothing is certain and we need to be practical, flexible and agile whilst we're planning. Tony, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that kind introduction, and thank you for sparing me the number of decades. That was very, very kind of you. Well, I mean, if we thought we knew the meaning of VUCA back in January 2020, I would suggest that we actually had no idea at all. We got it completely wrong. Little did we know just how much more VUCA the world would get. We've been fortunate overall in the food industry that it's proved to be quite resilient throughout the supply chain, and there's been little in the way of real shortages of food in most of the things, except of course, as in most places of the world, if you're a toilet roll supplier or something like that, but then maybe that's just us down here in Australia. But it hasn't affected the food supply chain very evenly. We've of course seen cafes, restaurants, cafeterias, all that side of the food industry absolutely decimated. Major impacts there. And it looks like somewhere between 10, 30, maybe even 40% of those cafes, restaurants and so on will never open again. Likewise, it's had quite an effect on manufacturers and farmers as well. We've seen millions of litres of milk poured down the drain because basically the cows still need to be milked, and that milk has to go somewhere. If it doesn't go to the customer, it goes down the drain. Similarly, we've seen farmers have to plough crops under because they were set up for food service. And it's not as easy as it might seem to actually go from supplying food service to retail, the different packaging requirements, delivery requirements, etc. So no one size fits all in the consequences to the food supply chain. But whatever's happened up until now, it's obvious that the world is and will continue to look different under COVID. How different it will be, how things will end up, where they will stabilise, no one knows. And I think if we look at the second wave pandemics in the UK, Europe and parts of Australia, it just confirms how chaotic this time is, how within weeks, something you thought was one thing is now suddenly another. But despite this increasingly VUCA nature of the world, we still need to plan for this unknowable future. The problem is, how do we plan for this future? We can't use a lot of our old planning methods and planning tools. They've been rendered useless virtually overnight because they rely on some degree to some certainty about at least the near-term future. And well, good luck with that. I don't think we're going to see too much of that in the near future, too much stability. And if there is one thing that the pandemic has taught us, is it's dangerous to think linearly in an exponential world. As we've seen with the way the virus takes off, understanding the exponential function is one thing we as humans don't do very well. It needs to be demonstrated to us, and the pandemic has certainly demonstrated that. And not only the pandemic, but other things throughout the food industry are changing at an ever-increasing exponential rate. And again, we still need to find a way to cope with these changes. And to consider the future and to make plans under the current circumstances, we're going to need a process that allows us to plan for immediate, short-term futures, preserves our medium long-term planning opportunities. And it might seem crazy to be talking about the long term, to be talking about 3, 5, 10 years from now, but we still do need to make sure that the decisions we make today don't adversely impact the long-term future. Because as we know, decisions you make today limit future actions. So we need to be sure that the actions we do take still take into account some of those longer-term opportunities. But obviously, under the current circumstances, taking months or even weeks to generate some sort of plan is unworkable. I mean, the other side of the coin is few, if any, organisations currently have the resources to devote to both coping with the immediate future, with all the chaos that's going on, as well as looking at in-depth planning. So what we don't need is a cumbersome, brain-numbing, resource-sucking process. We need something that is light on resources and that is agnostic to when things will be over. And that's a critical point, because no one knows when or even if the pandemic will be truly over. Will it recur every year? Will it not? Are the vaccines protecting against the disease or protecting against getting ill once you've got the disease? Two entirely different things. So we really just don't know where we're going to end up. So our planning method needs to be flexible, agile, and address whatever unknown road leads us to the actual future. Now, the time frame that we used to have to react flexibly and agilely, or a good definition of being flexible and agile, was you used to be measured in months. If you reacted within weeks, months, that was really, really good. But it's no longer weeks. It can be days or even a single day. I was talking to Phil and Mike last week, and they said that they had a plan that worked on the Monday, and things changed on the Tuesday. It had to be redone. That's how fast things can change at the moment. And we have no choice but to adapt to the new reality in which we find ourselves. And we can't simply put our heads in the sand and hope it goes away, because it's not going away. It's certainly not going away anytime soon. So I don't think that this plan that I have here is something that will only be useful for weeks, months. I think it could very well be useful, or any method you choose to adopt that's flexible and agile enough is going to be needed for some time to come. And so what I've developed, though, is a simple 5-step pandemic planning process, which, to make it easy to remember, I've called COVID. And each of the letters refers to a step in the process for planning under a pandemic. The first letter, C, stands for choose appropriate planning tools. As we've said, a lot of the planning tools that we used to use have gone out the window, because either they need a lot of resources devoted to them to make them work because they're meant to last for a long time, and or we find that they need a stable base with which to work, and that is simply not going to happen. And when we look at it from a future planning point of view, there's all sorts of different planning methods you can use. You can see a few here: future history, 3 horizons, causal layered analysis, the futures cone, environmental scanning, scenario planning, backcasting. All these things are out there. And what I've done is had a look and see which of these might be useful under the current circumstances. And I've selected the 3 horizons method, which you can see there in red. And the second one I've selected is scenario planning, which you can also see up there in red. And I believe that this combination is ideal for creating a process that generates the flexible and agile outcomes required to cope with the current turmoil. If we have a look at our first tool, the 3 horizons method, basically you're plotting time against a value. This is just one way of looking at the 3 horizons tool. Basically, horizon 1 is about incremental improvement of existing business systems. So it's a bit of business as usual, plus 5% increase in sales, 3% cost of goods decrease, and a procurement 1% improvement in costs. So that looks at a bit of business as usual. And that would lead us on to Horizon 2, where Horizon 2 is more of that step change. So a little bit in the way of incremental, but a lot higher step. We're creating new platform products, new ways of doing things within the business are significantly different to the business as usual. And then of course, Horizon 3 is the blue sky thinking. That's the out there where some of it seems more science fiction than science fact. And the actual length of the horizons can vary by industry, depending whether you've got certain cycles within industries or not. Generally, Horizon 1's up to about 3 to 5 years. Horizon 2 lasts you out to anywhere between 7 to 10 years. And then Horizon 3 is everything beyond those. So that's generally the 3 horizons method, but it does have some problems, as we've talked about. How can you do incremental improvements on business as usual when you don't know what business as usual is? And we'll come to that a little bit later on. The second tool that we've chosen is the scenario planning. And basically scenario planning involves identifying 2 key attributes, which are highly uncertain, but highly important in determining possible futures. And I picked one here that we're probably all familiar with. Everybody at home is just baking their heads off. I mean, flour sales here in Australia, the aisles were cleared of flour, they were cleared of baking soda, just couldn't buy these things for love nor money. So I thought this is a good example we can all relate to. So if we look at the top left-hand quadrant, which is quadrant 1, where we have a low proportion of the population back in the office and high flour sales, called the I love baking scenario. So everybody's thinking, it's wonderful. I'm baking with the kids. I'm bonding with the kids. It's fantastic. We never knew how good fresh bread was, and we just love baking. If we move across to the top right-hand scenario, which is where flour sales are high, and there's an increasing percentage of the population going back to the office, that's the I'm going to keep baking scenario, where people have enjoyed baking so much that despite the fact that they're spending hours more on the road going to and from the office, they're going to keep right on baking because they really enjoy it. If we move down to the bottom right quadrant there, which is a high population back at the office, but flour sales are decreasing, that's the I just don't have time scenario, where, hey, I'm spending 3 hours on the road now that I wasn't before. When I get home, the kids are ratty. I just really don't have time to do this. I'm just simply going to go back to buying bread from the supermarket. I'm going to have some delivered online. I just don't have the time to do it myself. Our fourth scenario, the bottom left, is where there's a low percentage of the population back in the office, but lower flour sales. That's the I'm over it scenario, where it's basically, yeah, cooking was good. It was fun at first. And then little Johnny, he burnt his hand and Jane dropped 2 bowls of stuff on the floor. What a mess. I'm over it. We're just going to get stuff delivered as we usually did. Now, from those 4 scenarios, that's where the power of this tool resides. It's capable with 2 simple attributes which are going to influence the future in generating 4 completely different scenarios. And what we do is we track those scenarios in real life, in real time, and then that tells us which of those futures that we're moving towards. The drawback at the moment, of course, is finding only 2 attributes that are going to determine the future is going to be extremely difficult. It's like finding a needle in a haystack, or maybe finding a needle in a haystack full of needles and then trying to work out which needle or needles are the right ones that you want. And we just need to point out, though, that these scenarios are not predictions. They're simply possible, plausible futures. We can't put a probability on them because they are determined by what happens in real life over time. So just consider them in that way, not as predictions. Now, if we have a then look at how are we going to use those tools, because they do have limitations, they do have issues. So we need to open up our minds, which is our O in COVID, challenge our thinking about the tools, about how we can modify, tweak, massage those tools and make them do something that maybe they're not designed to do, but will work under the pandemic conditions we find ourselves in. Because as far as I'm aware, no one's come up with a futures planning process for a pandemic. So if we have a look then at our 3 horizons, as we've said there, the drawback here is that you need a stable base for planning. And a good example of that is I used to work in the QSR industry. My company made hamburger patties for McDonald's. Now in Australia, we knew that we had 2 peaks of demand. One was at Easter, a very short, sharp, very high peak. In Christmas, a lower peak than Easter, but more prolonged. And we also knew that in January and February, with the kids going back to school and so on, we weren't going to see very many sales. And that held true for many, many years. Yes, up and down, plus or minus 5%, a little bit different, but you kept a little bit more stock. You could get over it, run the stock down in January. You could really tweak what you had in order to meet that demand. But that has gone out the window now. If everything looks good for Easter and all of a sudden the week before Easter there's a lockdown, that's gone. So the actual rule here for the 3 horizons method is that you cannot trust the past. So what I've done here is to add a new category, a new horizon called the horizon of chaos, where nothing is as it seems, nothing is as it was. You cannot rely on what you once knew to be true. You maybe can't even rely on what you know to be true next week, because it may not be. So the motto for the horizon of chaos is trust nothing, or certainly trust but verify, because you cannot say that what worked last week or the week before will work next week or the week after, let alone what worked last year will work this year. If we look at our scenario planning, our weakness here is that, as we were saying, how can 2 attributes tell us about the future under the pandemic? Because we've only got 4 possible futures. But how we get around it is there is nothing to stop us generating multiple pairs of attributes. We can generate the one we had, we can generate a second, a third, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, however many scenarios we like. We can generate micro scenarios with much shorter time horizons you would normally use. Normally in scenario planning, you might use years, 5 years, some of them could be 10-year horizons looking at the futures. Here, 10 weeks would be too much. Probably 10 days, maybe a little bit too short, but somewhere between 10 and 100 days is probably the right length of time for some of these attributes. And this generates for us the multiple needles. And then we test which of those is actually going to be most valuable in modeling the development of what's happening in the present. And using these tools, we can visualize many possible futures. And I've got to point out that in a pandemic, for planning like this, mindset is as important as the tools. We need to have a mindset that there are many possible futures. The old way of thinking that we knew what was happening, we have to discard. We have to be far more flexible and agile than we've ever been before. And it's critical to acknowledge how many short-term futures there are. So the question, of course, is how do we visualize these possible futures? Well, if we do a combination of the 4 horizons method I propose and the multiple micro scenarios, we come up with my scenario horizons method, where what we do is We acknowledge in the horizon of chaos that we really can't predict what's going to happen. We generate multiple micro scenarios under the horizon of chaos, and then we follow those to see what is actually happening. As we think things are smoothing out, we can move to horizon 1, and we can look at some multiple scenarios in there as well. And of course, the only way that we'll know the horizon of chaos is over is by looking backwards, because you can't look at it and go, it's finished, until it's been stable for a long time. Even then, it could be a little risky. But using this method, it enables companies, organizations to deal with both the immediate, highly volatile possible futures and balance them up with the short, medium, and long-term strategies. As I mentioned, it sounds crazy to be thinking about 3, 5, 10 years out, but we mustn't lose track of the fact that we do need to keep those in mind, because whatever we decide today is likely to limit in some way the actions we can take later on. And we can't have that future decision being compromised. Now, if we look at our I in COVID, which is identifying and understanding the signals of change. Now, we've mentioned flexibility and agility, and these are the keys to adapting and surviving. But you need to know when and where and how to be flexible and agile. And to do that and identify those signals, you need to have information. You need to collect data. And information definitely is more than ever today. Information is power. They've said information is the new oil. Well, they're right, but I don't think there's ever been a time when information has more power in helping determine the future of businesses and organizations, particularly in the short term, than we're finding now. Now, the most important part of the scenario horizons method is determining which signals are most important to the future of the organization. And a signal is simply something you notice that has a significance in determining a possible future. Like those two attributes we use for flour, number of people going back to the office and flour sales. That's something that had someone noticed in the early days. It might have been really, really useful to them to predict how things were going and the supply of flour, or to anyone in the flour supply chain. But few companies have the luxury of business as usual in devoting a huge amount of time to their planning, and they don't have the abilities and resources to conduct traditional long-term planning. And if they do, they wonder, is it even going to be worthwhile? So what I'm proposing is, if you like, a quick and dirty approach to identifying the important signals. And this will achieve a timelier and more useful outcome. Because when days and weeks matter, it's crucial to minimize the time and staff resources required to generate the possible futures. So how do we find these signals of change? How do we determine what it is we should be looking for? Good question. What we do is we do something called horizon scanning. We look out towards the future and we look for these signals of change to see what is happening. And as mentioned, that one, if we'd noticed our flour sales and the people working from home, that would have helped quite markedly to the flour supply chain. Now, we need to scan at least the industry's own information sources. So blogs, newsletters, it could be Google search terms even, all sorts of things to identify the trends in as close to real time as possible. Real time at the moment is the key, because you need to be able to react very quickly. And you also need, where possible, to look at peripheral industries or peripheral areas And a very useful one at the moment, an obvious one, I suppose, of course, is the political environment. If you were to look out and you were to see the Minister for Health is saying, oh, things aren't looking very good, and the Minister for Employment is saying times are tough for restaurants and caterers, and then the epidemiologists are saying things are not looking good, it's on the uptick, it could get worse, well, then you would take those as some signals that things are about to change. They're actually softening us up so that when the Prime Minister comes on and says we're locking down from Monday and tells you that on Sunday night, at least maybe you've heard from someone before. But if you picked up those signals of change and you said, aha, this is pointing in this direction, then you would be better prepared than most to react when the Prime Minister comes on Sunday night and tells you it's all locked down from Monday morning. Now, you need to have a look at what information you can acquire that will give you the most insight, how easily can you get it, and how much will it cost. And that's always a balancing act. Limited resources, but you have to try and look at how much information you can get without swamping the organisation and swamping your resources. And just again to point out one key thing is that no one can predict the future. The best we can do is predict possible futures. And anyone that says they can tell you the future, I'm afraid they are sadly mistaken. So now we've gone out, we've looked for our signals, we've looked at what's going on, and what do we do with all that data we've got? We've got all the things from the ministers, the epidemiologists. What do we actually do with it all? So what we look for there is patterns, relationships, and implications between the data. So joining the dots up, joining things together to give us a view on just what will be the future. And we need to put that in context, and we need to do that by sorting, collating the data, framing the signals, and then looking for those new patterns and relationships that weren't there before. And we're looking for sufficient signals that it gives us a direction. One minister coming on and saying, gee, things aren't looking good, doesn't make a pattern. 2, 3, 4 ministers, epidemiologists coming on and saying things are changing. That's a signal, a group of signals that are showing us a direction of where things are going. And we need to look for those weaker signals that tell us things are changing. So they might not be obvious. They're not saying the things are bad, there's going to be a lockdown. They're just saying, oh, things are bad, not looking too good. The strong signal that things are going to change dramatically is when we get the lockdown and we know the consequences of that. That's a strong, very strong signal that things are going to get a lot worse. And all of these things, all of this data and so on, these patterns are what we use to construct our futures. And we need to add all those various other attributes from our data collection. I mean, again, going back to our flour example, we could have added retail cake purchases versus food service cake purchases, for instance. Number of cafes opening versus retail flour sales. Are people buying more cakes now? The cafes are open than they were before. In any of these could signal changes in the market for the flour and the flour supply chain. And critically, considering coordinated multiple simple scenarios from multiple signals gives us greater agility and flexibility of organisations to dramatically improve their performance in our horizon of chaos. But we've got to acknowledge that most of these simple micro scenarios, they're only a temporary framework. They're not there to be as a permanent part of any long-term plan. Now, you know, how do we go about then getting it? How do we allocate who's supposed to do this? And again, I've said it's resource light. And the way that I propose to do it is that we spread looking for the signals out over our various departments. Marketing will look at some, finance will look at others, procurement will look at others, and then they'll be brought together by a coordinated group so that they can provide consistency of interpretation of the signal changes and the coordination of the organisation's actions. And I'm not suggesting by any means that we have half-day or day-long planning sessions or retreats to develop the data pairs. A couple of our brainstorming, I'm sure, will identify multiple suitable data points if we involve each particular department in the brainstorming and determination of what these signal pairs should be. Now, not all of them are going to be useful in the long term, but better to have too many than too few. We can weed out the ones that don't work, we can keep the ones that do, and we can develop new ones as circumstances change. As we've seen in one of the previous slides, we're in an era of exponential change, and we need to react exponentially. And what this process does is it reduces the possibility of what's called futures overload, where basically an organization's future planning, it just collapses under the weight of the resources required to follow all the scenarios, because usually scenarios are quite in-depth and quite detailed and take a long time to prepare. We don't have the time or the resources to do that. And as I mentioned before, as the horizon of chaos starts to smooth out, the process can be applied to the short-term horizon as well, because we don't know where the overlap will be. And we can produce further multiple possible futures. And as our resources allow, we can then take into account the medium and long-term futures as well. And we can use a more traditional scenario planning approach for that. The thing is though, taking action is the key. The process is designed to allow us to make decisive responses in response to rapidly changing circumstances. As one of my favorite sayings says, no data without turning into information. No information without analysing that information. No analysis without action. There is no point in doing the work unless we're going to use that to take some action. And that brings me to now the D in the COVID process, which is decisive action. Now, we never have perfect information. I mean, we never have had perfect information. Information is probably less perfect now than it's been, but we have all had to make decisions based on the best information we had at the time. But the availability of good data is the key to making good decisions. And that's what our scenario pairs are about, finding the best data to enable us to make the best decisions. And like chess, you need to be thinking many, many moves ahead and preparing responses for what our opponent, the pandemic, might do. And again, like chess, at some point you have to commit to the last few moves to checkmate the opponent. And so with your plans, you need to commit to decisive action. Because as was said, with good data, decision-making is easy. If you have either bad data or no data, you're just simply guessing. You're stabbing in the dark. And at the moment, it is quite dark out there. If we're going to shed some light, we need the light of information and the light of be able to make some sort of prediction on our futures with our planning method. So going back to looking at our scenario horizon method, basically it's designed to be, above all, a practical approach, something that can be applied by organizations without having to worry about, do I have any trained futures people? Do I have any trained people to go out and gather data? Do I need an app? Do I need to employ companies to gather all this data for me? The answer is no, you don't need to do that. You can do a very good job yourself. You know your industry, you know what's important, you know what to look for, and you can go out there and you can find the data pairs that will give you a view on what some of these possible futures can be. And if you spread that across the organization, then you will not go into information overload, futures overload, where basically the whole thing just becomes a mess. And because we're looking at these micro scenarios that can have a very short life, we can be very flexible and we can be very agile in pivoting to what we need to do depending upon the actual circumstances. And it enables us to cope with that short-term chaos that we're seeing now, and it still preserves our longer-term planning options. Now, how many scenarios, micro scenarios you actually need to generate, that really is a judgment call. It's determined by the resources you have, how many sectors you might be in, how many segments of the marketplace you are in, what your particular business is. It will vary quite radically. But the thing is, I've said, if in doubt, generate as many as you can think you can comfortably handle, and then pare down to those ones that you're finding really useful in coping with the current chaos and is giving you some ability to generate the possible futures so that you can see which of them are coming true as you follow the attributes. Go back again to a nice simple flower example. All we needed to track was indications of how many people are going back to the office and flower sales. Those two parameters should be either easy to get from the point of view of the flower sales. You could get point of sales data from retail. You could talk to your flower suppliers. You can gather that data. How many people are going back to the office? Government instructions. People should stay at home where they can. No, everybody can start going back to the office. If you're in an area with office buildings, go talk on the way to work or the way home to some of the building management. How's it going? How many people are actually coming back? There are ways of collecting this data simply and easily so that you can become knowledgeable on what's going on in that horizon of chaos. So if we have a look at, just have a review, sorry, of our COVID process, choose appropriate planning tools. A lot of the tools that we're used to using, as we say, have been rendered virtually useless overnight because they require some predictability. Predictability is in very, very short supply. We cannot rely on it anymore. But what we need to do is open our minds and challenge our thinking about selecting and using the tools that will enable us to address this horizon of chaos. That enables us to visualize many possible futures. And we need that mindset of possible futures, that there are lots of them, that we can no longer rely on the future. The fact that if you're supplying McDonald's, it's going to peak in April and peak in December. Cannot rely on that anymore. You need to understand and realize that, because the mindset is as important as the tools. One without the other will not work. And then it's about identifying and understanding the signals of change. Doing your horizon scanning, looking at what these signals are, making sense of them, collating them again, turning that data into information, analyzing the information, and then taking decisive action to execute the plan. Because if you don't take any action and you wait until that huge, strong signal comes through that everything's changed, it's quite possibly too late. So yes, it is possible to plan a pandemic. Those that do will reap the rewards. They'll survive, and they'll even prosper in these chaotic times. And don't forget, the best plans are developed before they're desperately needed. When you're desperate for a plan, it's probably too late. So I'll leave you now with a thought as to why we should bother to explore the future. There's a lot of people will go, oh yeah, look out 3 years, 5 years. Look, what's the point? No one really knows. What relevance does it have to be today? I mean, I've got to sit here and work on this week. I've got month end. I've got my quarterly results. I've got to get the strategy plan done. What does thinking about the future really do for me? And this is one of my favorite sayings that really, for me, encapsulates why you need to look at the future. The point of exploring the future is to better understand how to proceed from the present. So it enables you to link now with the future. And obviously, to get to the future, we have to move forward. And whilst we don't know the exact destination, if we make the right plans, at least we know we're proceeding in the right direction. Thank you.
Tony, thank you for that. I thought that was a really insightful summary of many events that lots of us have been through, and you've given us the ability to have a framework and some new tools for us to assist with the scenario planning, which I think many of people in this particular conference have done a huge amount of. The horizon of chaos is quite a scary term. I really like that. And the realization that there's no such thing as short term anymore. It's just most things now being immediate term. And that was a real example from the call that Phil and I had a week or two ago, where we're planning on Friday, we're making decisions. On Monday, we're confirming and reaffirming the decisions that we're making. And then on a Tuesday, we just throw everything out the window because the guidance from the government on certain things had changed. So I think the framework that you've given us is really helpful. I think the summary that you've done provides a great deal of reassurance for us as well in these very difficult times. Just had one question. Is there a recording of this? Yes, there is a recording of this and will be distributed after the event. Other than that, Tony, we don't have any other questions on that. So I just want to thank you again for your time. Thank you for your knowledge and sharing that with us, and a brilliant start to the conference. Thank you, Tony.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mike. And I wish you guys all the best with the rest of the conference. And as I say, and I wish all your members all the best for the future, whatever it may hold.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay, the exhibition is now open and you have some time to visit before the next session. The next session is Change Management with Graham Jones, who may be known to a number of you as he's delivered some training through the Academy for our members and also for the board and for the TUCO staff. If you're on the web page, you'll see the exhibition on the left-hand side of your screen. And if you're in the app, the exhibition is on the home page under additional resources in the center. We do have a competition running, so the more virtual booths that you visit and interact with, the greater chance you have of winning the raffle prize. There's also some additional individual raffles and giveaways from the exhibitors. Easy for me to say. We will reopen with the conference at 11:15. Can I please urge everybody to make an effort to visit the virtual exhibition? This is all brand new to all of us, but we want our members and our partners have supported us, and we want to show some care back and support them. I'll leave you now, and I'll see you again at 11:15. Thank you.